On episode 132 of the Vincast, I chat with Tasmanian winemaking pioneer Steve Lubiana. Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Gasbrook, also known as the Intrepid Wino, and thank you for joining me on another episode. It's great to have another one out and about and let you listen to another fascinating wine story. And this is an episode that I recorded last year when I happened to be down in Hobart. I was thrilled to be able to sit down with famed pioneer winemaker vigneron Steve Lubiana of Stefano Lubiana Wines, and it was fascinating to find out about his background and how they got started down there. So I'm really grateful to have been able to chat with him. I hope you enjoy the episode. Please stick around until the end so you can find out how to get in touch with us, to let us know. Please do go and leave a rating and review on the iTunes page for the Vincast and show your appreciation. But until then, I'll see you on the other side. Steve, we are sitting here in the gorgeous Derwent Valley on a beautiful, sunny, warm day.
Mm-hmm. Lovely spring day.
Lovely. And we're about to chat. Welcome on the Vincast. Thank you very much for making some time.
Thanks, James.
I start every episode of my podcast by asking my guest if they can remember the earliest interaction they had with wine that made them kind of think about it in a different way, that potentially put them on the path of a life in the wine industry.
A tricky one for me because I was always surrounded by wine from a very young age. Being son of a winemaker, and from a little taco, I'd come home from primary school and have lunch, and there'd be winemakers there, and so it was just part of my life. So it wasn't anything different or extraordinary. It was very ordinary, very normal.
Sure.
And my father never really, pushed me to become a winemaker, or he just did his own thing. And so I just became curious. And I started my first wine when I was 12 years old. It was Amarone.
Really?
I was really into Amarones when I was very young. And So
where did you grow up?
In the Riverland in South Australia, a small town called Marook.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And are you second generation Australian? Were you born in Australia?
Yes, and I was born in Australia, so I'm first generation Australian.
First generation, sorry,
and
and your parentage?
My grandparents and parents both moved over from Italy. They were displaced persons after the Second World War. So
right.
They came from Istria to Melbourne, and then from Melbourne, my grandfather bought an old distillery and converted it into a winery, and then my father followed quickly thereafter.
Right. Back in the homeland, were they involved in agriculture of any kind? In wine?
A little bit of agriculture, but mostly winemaking, buying grapes. My grandfather was a consultant, so he would travel around Italy to buy wine for other people. He had a very good palate, so he was like a palate for hire. While my father, he was very young when he came to Australia, so he started his winemaking in Australia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, under the guidance of my grandfather.
So the move up to the Riverland, was this around the time that they were kind of looking at irrigating and opening up, the Murray-Darling Basin for?
It was 1955. So
it was a bit before that.
Yeah.
Okay, but that was kind of the idea, was to just to continue that kind of business that they had back in Europe, in Italy, to do it.
And it was, it was focused on bulk wine, so it's focused on cask and just, everyday drinking wine, lots of it, no mucking around, just knock off a couple of bottles at lunchtime.
So it was vocational, it was business. It was
business,
there wasn't really much romanticism around it for them.
No.
Right, okay. And was wine drunk a lot at home?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we say no romanticism, it was an essential part of the diet.
Right.
You just wouldn't consider sitting down to eat food and pasta without a glass of wine.
Yeah.
So it was essential part of living.
So without being aware of it, you kind of grew up in this culture of, wine being part of a meal and part of family, and it's just a nourishment kind of thing. And
it was nourishment also, but then the wine, when I'd come home from from primary school, when I was let me think now, year 6 or year 7, I remember, and the winemakers always played tricks with me. So, okay, here's 3 glasses of Shiraz. One's got salt in it. They just get salt off the table. One's got a little bit of water in it. We know what's the difference between these 3 Shirazes, and I try and find out what's different.
Wow.
And then they already start training me. Which is the most tannic of these wines. Here's some Grenache. Here's some Malbec, and here's some Carignan, and so it's already starting to. And my father was too busy eating his pork knuckle and prosciutto, and but these other guys, they were always playing with me, I suppose.
Right. Did your grandfather get involved with that as well?
No, not at all. No,
okay.
he was very quiet. Because
he had the palate. So
he had the palate. Wouldn't speak to. He was just very quiet, reserved person. Never didn't say anything boo about anything, but he'd sit in his room with, say, 20 measuring cylinders and just blend for hours, and then come up with this. Here, this is the wine, and it was a cracker. He's very good at it.
Right. How old were you when you kind of thought that wine might be a career path for you?
I was pretty convinced at a fairly young age. So I think probably when I was about 10, something like that.
Really? Okay. But was it a thought of continuing in the family business, or kind of following your own path as far as making wine?
Oh, too young. I just thought it was exciting because there's always a lot of fun. There's a lot of action going on down the winery, and I thought, well, this is a lot of fun. And wasn't drinking a lot of wine back then. I was drinking water and wine. My parents would give me a bit of a mixture, but it was just exciting. I thought, this is the industry I want to be involved in. I had no concept of what quality was or anything like that. I was just too young.
Sure.
But I was drinking some some interesting wines. And as a very young palate, it started to form very slowly. Yeah.
And you made your first wine at 12.
Yeah. Well, I never actually finished it. I started it, so I got somebody to pick the grapes, then I laid them out on mats to dry them out because I really liked Amarone, and they were there for about 2 weeks, and then in the end, somebody got the shits and chucked it all into a ferment and got rid of it.
Wow.
So I never got to finish it.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It would have been amazing if you still had a bottle.
It would have been. Yeah.
So, what was the kind of the pathway for you to sort of learn more about wine and head towards a career in wine industry?
So I suppose the pathway was okay. I decided I wanted to become a winemaker. So back then, you needed to go to uni and study winemaking. So I went to Roseworthy and studied winemaking there, and that was just more beer drinking than winemaking.
Yes.
It was just a lot of fun, and made some very good friends, which some my best friends from all time.
Was it good to sort of interact with people from different backgrounds, different parts of Australia?
Oh, that's right.
Learning how to make wine.
That's where you
sharing ideas.
You get the because my folks weren't drinking German Rieslings or Spanish wines or wines from other parts of the world. They were just into making wholesome, easy drinking wines. And so at Rosewood is where I was exposed to all these different varieties and styles through drinking with friends.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like my son is at Adelaide Uni studying winemaking now, and he's discovering exactly the same thing with his friends.
Sure, seeing wines not from Tasmania.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you finished the qualifications there. Did you?
Yep.
Did you get any vintage experience at that point?
Yeah, so my first vintage was at Lewin Estate in Margaret River. That was must have been the 84 vintage.
84 vintage. What was the 84 vintage like?
So 84 vintage, that was pretty good, I think, what I can remember. A long time ago, but it was good wines. We're basically young interns. All you get to do is do all the cleaning. Clean the press, clean the floors, clean the tanks, and fork out, pump out, or shovel out all the fermenters. So, but it was good. Yeah, great place. I really loved Margaret River. It was really good. I was a keen surfer then, so was a good choice.
Yes, I have had some former guests of the podcast say my river was quite desirable because you get to make wine, but you also can go and have a surf. Get up early enough. That was your first vintage experience.
Yes.
That would have been
I mean, apart from as a
back at home,
as a young kid at
Yeah,
home,
yeah.
working summer holidays in the winery,
being exposed to a completely different
Yeah.
different region, different
Yeah.
varieties, that kind of thing.
yeah.
And so when you finished your qualifications, what was sort of the first job?
So, first job was I travelled Europe. I went around Europe, so I worked in Champagne for almost a year.
Yeah.
Worked in a little place called Porcher-Frère in Bissoyal. So I worked the vintage there, and then worked up in the mountains, snow skiing. Came home, did a vintage, back to Europe again, and then did a vintage in Castello di Ama in Chianti, Gaiole. That was fantastic. That was really good. Working again with lots of Sangiovese and Canaiolo and those other varieties. That was very eye opening. And then after that, sort of came back and sort of settled down and worked in my father's business. Sort of leased his business, took over the business. He sort of semi-retired, moved to the Barossa. He had another winery, and I ran that for a few years. Met my wife, and then we decided that okay, look, we don't really want to stay here. We really want to make fine wines, and
So it was still very much in the bulk end
yeah.
of the business.
Yeah, so we're doing about 3,000 tons. It was myself, my wife, and one cellar hand, and then we had a little bit of help during vintage. But it was a very well set up winery, and we were just making a lot of bulk wine, tankers of wine and juice going all over the place.
So this would have been at a time where like a lot more kind of technology was being introduced and better, more efficient ways of making wine in larger volumes. Did you kind of get a bit tired of that and sort of say, look, I want to look at it on a more micro level and be a bit more hands-on, smaller,
absolutely.
smaller batches, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was really fell in love with sparkling wine after my tour in Champagne, and so I really wanted to make sparkling. That was my key driver.
Yep.
So I needed a cold climate. I'd made my first sparkling wine in would have been 87 from Pinot grown in Renmark.
Really?
And,
Okay.
yeah, and I was trying to sell that around Adelaide and playing around with it, and then I realised, no, look, I really need to get to somewhere colder if I wanted to make sparkling wine.
Right.
And then I looked around Australia and ended up in Tassie.
How long did you spend kind of looking at different places?
A year and a half, yeah.
And what was it about Tasmania that appealed apart from the fact that it was a cool climate?
That was it.
Right.
And the soil. Yeah, it was whether it was in the middle of a forest and 10,000 miles from the closest town, we didn't really care. It was what is the best site, the best soil and climate to make the grapes, to grow grapes.
It's now pretty widely accepted that Tasmania is the premier region in Australia for sparkling wine production. Back then, was there much being?
No, none at all. It was when I came over, there hadn't been a single bottle released. This is back in 1988. And I was looking around Tasmania, and Graham Wilshire, he was probably the only person that was really into sparkling, and he showed me some stuff they had on tirage, and I thought, well, this is pretty good. And I thought, yeah, no, this is... And just tasting the strawberries and the fruit and the wines that were grown here, I'd seen some Piper's Brook wines that Andrew Perry was making, and I thought, well, this is fantastic, and it's exactly where I want to be.
So... what was the first move? You kind of came upon this particular part of
had to find
Tassie?
a piece of land. So we looked up Derwent Valley, looked around Piper's area, and then found this parcel of land in Granton, and we thought, well, this is exactly what I really want. I really want a poor soil site in a cool climate, so I can control the vigor. I don't want to have vigor control me as a winemaker, or a vigneron. And yeah, I thought this is it, perfect.
So the first vines you planted were primarily or exclusively for the purposes of sparkling production?
Primarily, I always leave the door open, I suppose, and as time has shown that we've apart from sparkling, we actually we sell more red wine, more red Pinot Noir than we do in sparkling. So probably 70% of our production is Pinot Noir, and of that, the majority is dry red table wine.
Was there much in this part of Tasmania at that point as far as
There's nothing in
viticulture?
Granton in this whole area here, not a single grape. Oh, hang on, there was a little bit. Kerry Carlin had a little bit of a small vineyard at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, what was the idea with the planting of the vines? How much was it? Just Pinot Noir and Chardonnay?
Yeah. So we started off with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, which has historically had the short history of short modern history of Tasmanian wine. Had shown to be produce really good grapes.
Right.
Because grapes have been grown here for quite a while. Yeah, from back in the 1800s or something like that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, like 'cause when Sydney was settled and Hobart was settled, because Sydney and Hobart are the oldest couple of cities in Australia.
Yeah.
And grapes were brought down to Maria Island back in the 18-something. I can't remember what it was.
So these are some of the ones that James Busby brought out.
Busby's, yeah, that's right.
Okay. What was the sourcing of those the vine material?
Yes, the vine material was mostly local to start with, because there wasn't many. It was all UC Davis material primarily.
Yeah.
And then as the years went on, there was more stuff that came in from France. That was Bernard selection clones, and then as they came on, we took them on and planted them as well.
Yep.
And now we're finding that there's a mixture. So we don't really find that any one particular clone is something that we want to have any emphasis on, but rather just a mixture of clones.
You're not looking at a clone going, oh, this is the clone that's going to save us and change everything completely.
Yeah, definitely not.
What was did you have in mind as far as the way you wanted to work in the vineyards? Did you have an idea at that point?
So we were pretty much back in the late 80s convinced that biodynamics was the way to go.
Right. Okay.
So I actually bought my first stirring machine either the year we came over or just before we came to Tasmania in 1990. And so we planted our first vineyard organically, with the idea to run it biodynamically, and we had we had no money, right? So we had second-hand posts and second-hand drip tube, and it was on quite a steep slope, and we had nothing but grief. So we said, oh, this is just not working. So we pulled the pin on that vineyard and then planted another vineyard on a flatter ground and ran that conventionally. We did that for several years until back in 2010 we thought, oh well, look, hang on a minute, we came here to grow grapes biodynamically, and we've sort of been going off the garden path a little bit, and need to get back on track. And so in 2010 we applied for we decided to
start the certification process.
Certification, yeah.
So in biodynamics.
In biodynamics, yeah. But before that, we'd always been compost was always an important part. We'd always been putting on compost.
Yep.
And over the years, we dropped all our synthetic
fertilizers.
Fertilizers, yes, and synthetic chemicals. So we're copper and sulfur for like about 5-6 years before we even applied for biodynamics. So we were 90% there. The only thing was we were still spraying Roundup under the vines, because that's the hardest part in organics is weed control. Everything else is pretty much easy. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you kind of come upon biodynamics as a way of working in terms of vineyards?
That was Four Corners. I did a Four Corners on ABC did a story on Alex Podolinsky. And,
okay.
The dude from Victoria.
Yeah, I mean, several former guests have talked about. I mean, even I had an Italian producer, biodynamic producer, who was more influenced by Alex than by Steiner.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, Alex was very, strict, sort of Steiner school, and when I saw the story about it, I thought, well, that's exactly what we're about, because my father found a old chart, or what we'd call it. It was basically how to make wine by the moon that my great grandfather had made.
Okay.
So, and it showed the moon symbols and what to do, and he had drawn it himself. And as a child, I remember seeing that. We've lost it. We've tried to find it. We can't find it, which is a real bugger. It would have been really beautiful to have that.
So cool, yeah.
Yeah, but and that with that memory in my mind, and then seeing Pollington and saying, well, "Hang on, this is all clicking. It makes sense." Working how we used to work. So, and in more recent years, I've been thinking, well, this is really. I mean, Steiner does do some interesting stuff with homeopathics and the constellations from far planets, but really the Aztecs and the Persians have been farming with the moon and the stars for millennia, and this is just going back to what we used to do, a couple thousand years ago.
Yeah,
and so. And Steiner's saying, hang on, we can do a few other little things as well by using some preparations and some homeopathics. So I think it's a revisitation of an old school of farming.
in the same way that there are a lot of winemaking techniques which are being reintroduced. These, but they're just old, like skin contact with white varieties or use of amphora. That's an old technique that kind of got sort of put aside as more modern, as understanding came, science, that kind of thing. But I like the fact that people are kind of reintroducing old techniques, but with a better understanding about how you can work to not have completely faulty wine. So did biodynamics come first, or did Tasmania come first? Did you kind of get the idea to do biodynamics after you'd made the decision?
Pretty much at the same time, similar time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was hard work to
hard
start
work.
off with?
Yeah, we were broke. We had nothing. We found this property, and then we borrowed some money from the bank, and had money borrowed from the guy, what do you call it, vendor finance, the guy who owned the property. So he was financing us as well, and then a little bit of help from the family as well. Interest rates were 18%. So we're paying, we look today as 2% or 5%. It's just nothing.
Yeah.
So interest rates were just killing us, and so when we bought the place, we ran it as a market, because it was a market garden. We ran that for about 18 months and said, look, we're just losing more money. And then we thought, right, we've got to get back to what we came here for. And my wife was working for a local company, and then I thought, right, we'll just set up the winery and do some contract winemaking and buy some grapes in the meantime. And so that got us going. The contract winemaking got us going, got some liquidity into the business, so we could just invest that into our vineyards to get some vines planted to get us going.
Was it really difficult at that time, considering that there really wasn't much else down here, and there wasn't kind of a lot of knowledge about what might have been done in the past, and you couldn't kind of share ideas and show what you were doing to someone? So what do you think? What
definitely
do you think
challenging. I mean, I had my experience, or university degree, but that doesn't really help you when you're just sort of thrown out to a deep end, and you work on the experiences from local people, from what varieties are growing and seem to be doing well. But at the end, it's you got to sink or swim, I suppose, and have a good go at it.
What were the first wines that you made from your own fruit?
Pinot Noir, dry red, which we would buy grapes and then sell that in bulk in 1,000-litre pelicans to a friend of mine in a contact I'd made in Riverland in Melbourne, and he would bottle it and sell it in Melbourne. So I was selling, and then we started.
Was it being sold as Pinot or sold as dry red?
I'm not too sure. I don't know. When it left to us, we just got the check, and that's all we were worried about.
We can eat.
Yeah, it was like that. It was really like we can eat.
Because that was still before Pinot really took off.
And that was when there was 20% sales tax on wine and no rebate.
Right.
Things were tough.
Yeah. What was the first crop you got from your own vineyard?
So that would have been Pinot and Chardonnay, both. Yeah.
When was that?
That was 93.
Right.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges as far as your own stuff in
Yeah,
terms
I
of
mean,
making the wine as well?
I was just learning how to handle, the fruit, the delicacy of the fruit down here. Instead of using sort of South Australian techniques and high extraction and trying to make a big red wine, it just doesn't work with Pinot Noir. You have to be much lighter-handed, and
Less is more.
yeah, respect the fruit. Yeah.
So when you bottled your first wine and took it to market, again, what was the kind of the early response from
Yeah, it was good.
from people
Yeah.
out there, considering that Tasmanian wine was still not kind of where it certainly sits today as being one of the premier cool climate wine regions in Australia?
Yeah, no, the response was good, and but basically, from day one, we sold everything we made, and we just bought and made as much wine as we possibly could for about 15 years. And for 15 years, we sold everything we could possibly make. So it was just like, get the maximum amount of grapes and turn it into wine, and it all sold. So it was good. Yeah, no problems there. And then, I suppose as more competition, as more people started making wine, and then things started to get a little bit, a bit tighter, a bit harder to sell. But still, even to today, we sell all our wines pretty well, which is good. Yeah.
What were the sort of the main markets for your wine in that kind of first 15
definitely
years?
Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah.
And then which has grown to Brisbane is a very good market for us as well, and to a lesser extent South Australia and Western Australia. South Australia difficult because
They're very parochial.
yeah, parochial, and when I was there, it was Cabernet and Shiraz, and they were the varieties of the day, and so Pinot Noir never had a hope in hell. But while I think Melbourne is a bit more cosmopolitan, and in the early days they were prepared to drink widely.
Sure. What about the local market? How did that change?
Local market was
over
very
time?
good. Yeah, no, it was an important market for us, selling wine locally, because Tassie people were generally very supportive, and they would drink Tasmanian wine. They always wanted their bigger reds as well, and so that's why we planted some Merlot, not just for the local market, but also for frost protection. Ripening later and flowering later, it would give us some security there. So yeah, we needed something else apart from Merlot, Pinot, for the local market. But the local market was very good. Yeah.
And you would still have an opportunity to do a bit of travel, whether it was going to sort of sell wine or go and visit other wine regions, wine producers?
First few years while we were in Tassie, it was a bit hard, but then once we got a bit established, I had more time, and September I could get over to Europe, and I did vintages in I'm trying to remember now. So a couple of vintages in Burgundy for Chateau de Chamilly in Mercure, and then vintages in Austria for Pitnauer, and then a vintage in with Radicon in what's the name, Oslavia. Yeah.
Was that a good opportunity to kind of get out of Tassie and the varieties you're working with and maybe winemaking techniques you're using, and kind of be exposed to some other stuff?
I mean,
give you some ideas.
Yeah, the main thing is you get inspiration and see how people approach their wines. It's not looking at getting any recipes or anything like that. It's more about understanding how other winemakers approach their winemaking. Their direction and their inspiration, where they, get their ideas from, and then I can relate. I get, like for example, when I was working for Pitnauer, my job was the analysis for I did all the analysis of the grapes coming into the winery, which was great because that was just a broom handle pushed into the bin, and I'd check the sugar level with a refractometer, and that was it. So there's no analysis, no sugar, pH, acid, alcohol, none of that crap, sulfurs. You just, when you're experienced winemaker, you don't need to have all these numbers.
Yeah.
Just forget it. Just trust your palate and go with that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that was really, eye-opening for me. Because how old are you? I'm 55 years old. I've been making wine for 35 years. Shit, you should bloody have an idea. So you do know, believe in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that comes with experience and a relationship with the
That's right.
vineyard, and just trusting that you sort of have a decent idea about what's going to happen.
Yeah, 27, 28 years here with one vineyard, one site.
Yeah.
You get to know the terroirs, even parcels, square meterage. So that's a 1 hectare block. Well, I know that top corner of theirs, it dries out a bit. That bottom corner needs extra leaf plucking. And that other side over there, well, we need to, leave more buds on the cane over there. And you get to know all those little intricacies after such a long period of time. Yeah.
Have you seen the Tasmanian wine industry kind of change over the past 20 plus years?
Yeah, it's really in the last sort of 5 years. It's very slow to start with, and to get really any traction. But in the last sort of 5-6 years, we've had a flush of new winemakers and young blood coming into the state, which is really good. Because we're still very, very small. I think we're only about 6,000 hectares, I think, for the whole state, something like that, or 6,000 tonnes, something like that. I'm not too sure on numbers, but it's changed a lot, and I think it's still got a big future ahead. Especially with climate change. We're really noticing, things getting quite warm and dry, more and more so compared to. When I was here 25 years ago, it was a lot cooler.
Yeah. How do you think that the Tasmanian wine industry should sort of be evolving with something like climate change, and how could they kind of cope with the challenges?
What we want here in Tasmania is a sort of steady growth. We don't want 100 winemakers coming down and wanting to plant up 50 hectares each. I think that would be bad for the industry, bad for everybody. And it's almost impossible to do anyway, because Tassie, you're lucky to find 20 hectare blocks of land that are in one parcel, because it's so hilly and the microclimate's so varied. You can have a hill that's mostly north facing, and then the other half sort of south facing. We don't want to be planting on the south facing slope. So it's sort of self-limiting in a way, Tasmania, the topography of it.
Over the years, how have you changed as far as what varieties you work with, and maybe different winemaking styles you might have been experimenting with and trialing?
Well, varieties. Well, like we're drinking right now while we're having this lovely talk, is we're sipping on some Shiraz, which I never would have thought of planting, 15 years ago. But now it's just getting warmer. Like today, you can see it's just beautiful spring day, and we can see that we can ripen up these later varieties a lot better than we thought we could. I wouldn't say Nebbiolo might be pushing it a bit, but the other mid to late, not super late, but mid ripening varieties are going to be successful down here, and I think there's great scope for those. Yeah.
You just mentioned Nebbiolo, and being that your family background is Italian, did you kind of, as working with Italian grape varieties, been a somewhat recent kind of idea in your mind, or had you possibly intended to do it, but there just wasn't the vine material available?
Yeah, all those. Also, just my experiences. I have, only worked a vintage in Chianti once, but I've got a lot of friends in Burgundy, and I suppose my interest was swayed more to France rather than Italy. But saying that, I like the savouriness of Italian varieties, and I think there's some scope there, and finding something that grows in your site. So my blinkers are open to finding what works in our site, whether it's French, I don't care, Spanish, German, whatever. It's what grows best in your area, and you can make the best drinking wine out of that. And so the doors, and like Nebbiolo, when we tried to grow that make it into a red wine, we found it a little bit difficult, But as a sparkling base, as a light wine, as a white, almost like a white wine or a rosé, fantastic. So you get surprises along the way. Yeah.
And what about in the cellars? Have you kind of been expanding and trying different stuff there?
Yeah, so in the cellar, we've always been more, less and less hands-on. And the winery was designed as a gravity winery, so it's went from being a 3-level winery now to a 4-level winery. So we have grapes coming in, and then they're hand sorted, and they go into an open fermenter on a mezzanine floor, which then drains down to a tank for settling, which then drains down into the underground cellar for maturation. So that side of it's working really well. And then the other side is that I've never really liked stainless steel sort of ever, and if I could, I wouldn't have a stainless steel tank in a winery. But they are very convenient, they're easy to clean, and so we use them now. Like if you go in their winery now, we're November, and it's just about empty. I think there's only 2 tanks. They've got some wine in them. All the wine is in oak, pretty much, and that's we've moved to large format foudres and vats from 1,000 to 3,000 litre capacity, and I think I really like the wine made in those, fermented in those and stored in those. I think the wine breathes during maturation, and there's a softening of the acidity, which is important for us in Tasmania. So we'll be expanding our large format oak program.
It's pretty capital intensive.
Very capital intensive
project.
Well, luckily we don't have an accountant working for us, and it's just my wife and myself, and so we just say, okay, we'll just do without a holiday this year, and we'll just buy another 3 or 4 foudres.
Yeah.
And so we don't sort of make wine to a price. Make it for love, because we enjoy it and do what we think is the right thing. Yeah, and then hopefully the money will come.
Something that I tend to find in the wineries of biodynamic producers is a cement egg. Have you ever thought about
not a cement one? I've got a ceramic one.
Yeah,
600 litre one, which we've our first amphora. Well, we call it amphora. It's an egg. That was 2012. So we've been doing skin contact whites. Actually, we've been doing skin contact whites since our family since 1955. So
really?
In Riverland, all the Gordo was all skin contact white. So I reckon we've done about maybe 100,000 tonnes of skin contact whites. Shitloads. The fermenters were 20 tonne back in the Riverland, and we'd fill them up with Gordo, ferment them on skins for a week, roughly, and then we'd press them off and then finish the fermentation off.
Right.
So that was a technique that my grandpa brought back from Istria. So he was obviously doing that back over there, and so I was and I thought, this is weird. What are you doing? Fermenting when I was as a young kid. What are you doing fermenting whites on their skins? This is that was not the way things were taught at uni. Learning winemaking, and it's funny how we go the full circle. So seeing something like that with so much wine being made fermented on skins, and back round to it being very popular again today.
But that, like, the idea that white varieties must be pressed and temperature, has to be low and filtration, that kind of thing. That sort of only came around in the 60s, 70s, thereabouts. Like,
we're family.
Tabilk was a producer that was pretty forward thinking, and with their Marsanne, for example.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me at all that back in the 50s.
Yeah.
It
always done
the
that.
whites were on their skins.
It's very hard to press Gordo without fermentation as well. So
Yeah.
I think it was a practical approach as
Stabilisation,
well. Well, it's just a slipskin variety, so you go to press it and you can't get the juice out of it.
Right.
Unless you add enzymes.
Right.
And so whether they had no enzymes or just preferred to ferment to get... And they needed body as well. They wanted tannin. The Italians wanted tannin in their white wines.
Yep.
They didn't want light, easy drinking, thin stuff. They wanted gutsy white wines. And so for fermenting on the skins, we made this hock, basically it was called. And it was Gordo and Sultana and, Trebbiano, all sorts of varieties that were skin fermented to get that tannin and structure.
I remember seeing on Langton's like selling old bottles of hock from, I don't know, like Brown Brothers or something.
Mm-hmm.
I never understood what it was. It was like, is that just like a different bottle shape or something?
Yeah.
Now I know.
Yeah.
But obviously, skin contact in a climate like Tasmania with whites is going to be a very different proposition to what it would have been in the Riverland, and obviously different varieties. What
Yeah, totally.
what
Yeah.
skin contact do you do
Well,
down here? What are you looking for?
Yeah, skin contact here, obviously not mass production bulk
No.
wine. So it's all about high quality, fine, elegant wines. And so the first couple of vintages, 2012 and 13 vintages of skin contact wines were Riesling, which took ages, like 3 or 4 years before they were approachable. They were very spicy and almost had curry-like characters. But then after about 3 to 4 years, they totally changed and became really interesting and just multi-layers of just beautiful complexity. Then I thought, well, while that was happening, I'd already decided, okay, I want to make a bit of a Chardonnay Sauvignon Blanc. So then we moved to Chardonnay Sauvignon Blanc blend, where we'd have like 80% Chardonnay, 20% Sauvignon Blanc. And
Co-fermented?
Co-fermented, yeah, in the same amphora. And that worked really well, with variable success between the vintages. And now I'm sort of I'm working out what blocks. I think it's all to do with the vineyard and how I treat and the vines in terms of shoot thinning and leaf exposure, bunch exposure, to make sure to get the wine I want in the end. I think phenolic ripeness and fruit exposure is very important on these things, and that's something I picked up, working with Ribola Giallo in Radicon.
Sure.
By seeing the fruit in the vineyard, by harvesting the fruit, you say, "Whoa, look at this! This is bloody almost orange." The fruit before it even goes into the fermenter. So I can see
golden.
Yeah, and you can see the effect the sun has had on the fruit. And I think, okay, well, this is pretty important.
And you mentioned your son's now studying winemaking. You're keen. Has he already been involved with the?
Yeah. He made some wine last year down at. We have another vineyard down the Derwent Valley, and he made some wine down there, and which will be released, I suppose, in a year or two. So he's very keen. He's loves his wines, and he works when he's not studying wine. He's working at East End Cellars selling wine. So he's fanatical. He's crazy about it. He loves it. He loves drinking it and the whole thing. Yeah.
And is he sort of talking with you about interesting projects, like as far as
Yeah.
again, techniques and
Oh, I don't know
varieties?
about techniques. We very much. We still got a lot to learn. You learn so much at uni, but you really learn on the ground. And number one place is with the vineyard. So the quality is made in the vineyard.
Sure.
And then winemaking is a caretaking role, how I see it. Yeah.
And obviously, now with the cellar door and the osteria here, you've had this for a number of years now. It's obviously a great opportunity as far as wine tourism. There's a lot of people coming into Hobart, whether it's to go to Mona or to go to one of the fine restaurants. It's a nice opportunity for people to come out here and taste and meet you. Has that been really great to have a lot more people coming out?
It's great. I mean, that sort of completes the whole picture of Italian style, or my experience of Italian style living. It's drinking the wine and then enjoying it with friends and having food. Because my father always said, don't put wine up on a pedestal. Food is number one. Because it came from wartime, so you can live without wine, but you can't live without food. So,
well, particularly that part of Italy, it's long and difficult history.
Trouble, yeah.
World War One was an absolute bastard.
My father lost his winery in World War One. He lost it again in the Second World War. He said, stuff this, I'm taking the first boat out of the joint. And it was either Canada or Australia.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be Australia. He didn't really choose. He just get me out of here. And he came here. But anyway, so wine and
be grateful for what you have rather than elevating it.
Yeah, so wine and food is just intrinsic in life, and don't get too carried away. Just enjoy it, And so the Austria is part of that. Yeah.
Well, I had the good pleasure of having lunch here last May, and I mean the food's fantastic and goes very well with the Stefano Lubiana wines. Steve, I just want to say thank you so much for making some time. It's been really great to come back down, and obviously on this beautiful day. Obviously slw.com.au is the website. That's and people will be able to find social media accounts on there.
Yeah, so we've got our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter feeds all on that page.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and looking forward to tasting some more wines as well.
No worries. Thanks, James.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us on this episode of the Vincast. I have been James Garsbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can find me on social media at Intrepid Wino on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And the podcast can be found on Twitter at the Vincast. I'd love for you to check out my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Intrepid Wino. Lots of different videos there, including my videos chronicling my winemaking experiences, and lots of episodes of Let's Taste with the Intrepid Wino, where I open up Australian and sometimes I think some New Zealand wines as well. And I think I've done a couple of Let's Taste videos of Stefano Lubiana wines, so do check them out. Please do subscribe, leave a comment on one of the videos or more of the videos, like video, and share it on social media. I'd love to hear from you there. Of course, you can subscribe to the podcast on any number of different podcast sharing platforms, apps, programs, iTunes, Player FM, Stitcher, Podbean. I think it's on iHeartRadio, maybe Spotify soon. Subscribing means you get the newest episode as soon as it becomes available. You can get access to the back catalogue of episodes, and it's also a fantastic place for you to leave some feedback for myself and also for guests by leaving a rating and review, which also helps the podcast get out to a bigger wine-loving audience. Of course, all the information is available on my website, intrepidwino.com, as well as all the writing I've done in the past, chronicling my wine journey around the world. But guys, until next time, bye.
Earbuds, Melbourne's podcast network. earbudsnetwork.com